Morning, everyone. My name's Ian Allison, and I cover mainly enterprise or blockchain for CoinDesk. And we're really excited, and I'm personally really honored to have AWS here talking for the first time about their blockchain plans for to take a large slice of this market over, I guess. And we've got Rahul Patak here, and I'll let you introduce yourself in the context of AWS.
Great, thanks Ian, and thanks everybody. It's great to be here. Rahul Pathak, I'm the general manager for Amazon Managed Blockchain, as well as a number of our other database and analytics services at AWS.
Yeah, well, I'd like to start by saying this space, this blockchain as a service type space, has become it's becoming more and more sophisticated. And I refer to recently there was this quorum announcement with Azure and a deep integration, very focused, a lot of work. And I remember back when Ethereum and Azure was the first partnering, and I think Ether actually spiked at that time, and it was quite a big deal. But today you've got kind of those sorts of things. You've got Bluemix with IBM. So I suppose ask you first of all, what would be, the unique selling points of what you're doing?
Sure. So when we looked into what customers were trying to do with blockchain, we really wanted to deeply understand their use cases and applications, and we really came across two main categories of use case. So one was where customers wanted an immutable record of transaction history, but there was a centralized trusted entity, and for that we offer the Amazon Quantum Ledger database. And then the second case was where we saw customers that wanted distributed ledgers and decentralized trust, and that's where we found the Amazon Managed Blockchain service. And so our intent with this was to make it really easy to set up blockchain networks based on Hyperledger Fabric, which we launched into general availability at the end of April, and then also with Ethereum, which is coming soon. And so customers can set up enterprise-grade networks within a few minutes. We take care of securing everything, providing key management services to encrypt the certificate authorities, secure networking endpoints, all of that, just to allow scaling and robust enterprise application development.
So Ethereum coming soon. Can I ask you, have you got more stuff in the, like R3 Corda, something like that? Is that in the pipeline?
So AWS works with over 40 partners in this area that are providing blockchain services and a range of frameworks to customers around the world. And so from our perspective, we're always going to be paying attention to what customers are looking for and making sure we're meeting their needs.
The reason don't mean to put you on the spot too much. The reason I ask that is because what I'm sensing is that you're a spectrum from Ethereum, decentralized, very decentralized at one end, and it seems to me that something like Corda would fit in that spectrum quite well towards the quantum ledger at the other end.
Yeah. So I can't discuss our roadmap in detail in public, but I can say that we'll always be listening to our customer feedback and iterating in that regard.
Looking at the managed blockchain service, I was really impressed by some of the kind of use cases that are on the website. So Ethereum, Open Ethereum as diving into retail and loyalty seemed like actually a really exciting use case for Ethereum right there on your webpage, I thought.
Right. Yeah, and at the moment, most of the use cases that we see are for Fabric, for Hyperledger Fabric frameworks, but I think there is a ton of opportunity for Ethereum-based blockchains as well. And
some of the other cool things that these blockchains as a service things do, like I notice this idea of a node's behaving, without getting into an appropriate level of detail, if a node's not behaving well, it gets automatically replaced. And I heard a DevOps guy, a blockchain guy once referred to that as being a hall monitor, which I thought was quite a good way to describe it. But you do all that kind of, these are some of the value adds that people maybe don't understand from this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in addition to provisioning networks and peers, we make it easy for these networks to scale up and down. We do monitor the various components and can automatically replace them. And then another difference relative to running Hyperledger Fabric by yourself is that in the open source Fabric, the ordering service is built using Apache Kafka, and we've replaced that and augmented it with technology from Amazon Quantum Ledger Database. So you can get a very scalable and durable central ordering service as well. And this is all managed transparently on behalf of customers.
That was you got my next question. And it was so you've augmented Hyperledger's ordering service with your own engineers.
That's right. So the Quantum Ledger Database is an immutable, transparent, cryptographically verifiable journals. And so it's got a great fit for the ordering service that sits at the center of Hyperledger Fabric. And we've been able to rely on technology that we've used internally at Amazon for years to build a scalable and durable and high-performance platform.
So, I mean, when I was last night, I was looking at the managed blockchain web page, and or at the Quantum Ledger web page, I should say. And at the bottom, it says, at the bottom of the page, it says, looking to build a blockchain, you click here. And I was thinking, you know, maybe at the bottom of that page, the foot of the other page, it should say something like, you know, I no longer care about decentralization, click here. I don't know, without being blithe.
No, I mean, I think we should probably take a look at that, because I think the real use cases for the Quantum Ledger Database are scenarios where decentralized trust isn't an issue. So for example, Health Direct Australia is a single entity that's responsible for an auditable and always accurate state of healthcare information for Australian citizens and residents. And so they control the entire system and information platform, and they want to have a centralized but auditable and immutable record of every change they made to a piece of data. So for them, the Quantum Ledger Database is a perfect fit. They don't need all of the additional consensus elements that you would want with a decentralized trust applications.
I mean, this is a quote from someone, but to describe it, a centrally administered immutable data ledger within AWS, that's what it is. The reason I say that is because sometimes these other enterprise blockchains that are on the cloud or wherever, they tend to be defending how decentralized they are. But you've taken a very pragmatic approach, I feel, where you're saying, look, we're going to shamelessly, if that's the right word, we're going to say, you know, we've done away with this complex consensus business. We've done away with the stuff that maybe you don't need, that maybe a lot of businesses don't need. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to think about it. I mean, as we spoke to customers and got deep with them on what they were trying to solve, we found there were many situations where customers were using blockchain frameworks really to have this immutable ledger capability. And they didn't need all of the various consensus elements because they had full control over the ledger. And so with the Quantum Ledger Database, QLDB, what we have is a journal that's transparent, immutable, and cryptographically verifiable, and that's a central system. And then we have a set of database-like APIs, so customers can use things like SQL and familiar constructs to really query the journal to see and track every single change that was made, as well as the ability to easily query the history and the current state of their data. So for that very pragmatic use case where you were dealing with something where a central entity controlled the system of record, that's what we created Amazon QLDB for.
And maybe talk a bit about how you were maybe out in the field talking to kind of customers, blockchain people that were interested, because I think that's pretty interesting that you're picking up this, you're feeling that this was the temperature out there, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way we work at AWS is we really try and get very close to our customers and really understand what business problems they're trying to solve, rather than focus on what technology is needed to solve the problem. So once we have a deep understanding of what customers are trying to do, we can then take a step back and decide what are the best ways to actually solve this problem. And so in the case of Health Direct Australia, there's no other participant, so QLDB works. But we also worked with the Singapore Exchange, and there they've got the monetary authorities, they've got various trading partners, sell-side partners and buy-side partners, and so they really wanted to have a decentralized blockchain framework. And that's where we wanted to go with something that was compatible, broadly speaking, with the ecosystem, and that's where we landed on Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum.
And good, that's interesting. So there's two types of customers, and do you perceive that there might be crossover, but like someone might decide that they weren't happy with running a, you know.
Well, I think there is absolutely crossover. I mean, we spoke to a company called Smarto. They're an online advertising exchange. So every display ad you see, typically there's an auction that's being run in the background, and multiple companies compete to show that ad. And then once the ad is shown and an action is taken, somebody gets paid. And they have exchanges that run these auctions all the time, millions of times a second. And so Smarto is one of the larger ones in Europe. So as the exchange for transactions on their network, they're the trusted single entity. So for them, they can use the QLDB service and its ledger database just to provide a record of every auction and every payout and every transaction. But when they're interoperating with other exchanges, they don't want to relinquish control of their data. So they're actually evaluating blockchain-based solutions, because that way they can each have their own copy of the transaction record. No single entity controls the data. So internally, they've got a ledger use case. And then among partners, they've got a blockchain use case because it's decentralized. So we absolutely will see some crossover.
This was a rumor, and I hope it's not inappropriate to say, but I heard, disclaimer, I heard that the quantum ledger database actually grew out of kind of internal work at Amazon, apologies, that you were doing on to do with the retail stuff. So it was Amazon retail, and it was just a kind of record of truth with cryptography added. So that, I mean, what that reminded me of actually was back in the day, you know, Nokia engineers had a communication thing that they used, and they wonder if we could roll this out in Finland. It's a pretty spaced out place, and that was SMS, you know, a massive cash cow for the telco industry. First of all, is that rumor true?
So Amazon QLDB is based on ledger technology that we've used internally within Amazon for years. And you know, at our scale, both in our e-commerce business, but also in our web services business, we've had a need to maintain an immutable record of state. And so that core ledger component, the journal sitting inside QLDB, is something that we've used extensively at very high scale. And then in thinking about you know, does this solve a problem for us, and might it also solve problems for our customers? That's when we think about how to externalize the technology. And we have a long history of doing that, whether it's machine learning, recommendation systems, and now with ledger technology.
That's super interesting. And I was chatting to a Gartner analyst called Aviva Latan, who's very respected, a very smart person. And she'd written this research note, which I'm sure you've seen, which I thought was really interesting. It's worth quoting. She'd said that by 2021, she thought at least 20% of projects envisaged meant to run on permissioned blockchains would instead run on centralized auditable ledgers like the one that you've built. That's a big, I mean, you must, what do you think? Are you happy? A great research note.
I mean, you know, I think it's hard to say how precisely it's going to evolve, and I don't have a perspective on the percentage, but I do think that there are use cases today for which customers are using blockchain frameworks where they really need ledgers. And I think that, you know, by offering both of these to our customers, I think we're going to see customer use cases naturally move to the ones that fit them best.
I mean, just sticking with Ms. Latan's analysis for a second there, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, the point she's making that is a lot of these enterprise blockchains out there, they're not using very distributed kind of consensus. They're not using tokenization, which she thinks is, you know, one of the really cool things that this technology does. And I know that there probably are a few enterprise people that are doing tokens, so, you know, apologies to them. But, you know, what do you see? What do you detect that people kind of don't really need, that they think they maybe need? You know, where do you see all this overhead that's maybe not required?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the centralized versus decentralized piece. I think on the tokenization side, we have spoken to customers that are looking at using private tokens that might interoperate with the Ethereum public blockchain as a way to generate incentive economies within their networks. But for a lot of customers, what we see is, you really, if you think about a single company that owns 99% of its supply chain, they may not need a blockchain framework because they can just require all of their suppliers to use their centralized system of record. But if you think of a group of companies perhaps that are more peers, that's when you tend to get into situations where each person wants to maintain their own copy so they can independently verify what's happening. And that's where the more blockchain type and Hyperledger Fabric type situations will play out. So I think there are valid use cases for each of these pieces: a central ledger, a decentralized ledger framework like Hyperledger Fabric, as well as a tokenization-based system that ties to Ethereum.
So, and going back to what you were saying about this history of testing things internally, such a big kind of company, where else, if you can talk about it, abstractly maybe, where else are you looking at kind of blockchain-y stuff inside your own business?
I mean, I think our use cases at Amazon sort of map pretty well to the general use cases that you'll see, whether it's in financial systems or working with partners or supply chain. These are all sort of areas where I think the broader community as a whole is taking a look at blockchain applications, and we have similar use cases internally.
Good stuff. And like last year, Consensus, there was an announcement about the Consensus company Kaleido, and you were doing some really interesting work with them. And I remember some of that stuff involved kind of mainnet anchoring with the Ethereum public net blockchain and stuff, which was pretty interesting. And do you want to, I mean, going back to that kind of stuff, I guess you're doing a lot of stuff, but
we are, and we did announce our Kaleido's availability on the AWS Marketplace last year and work closely with them. And they've helped a bunch of customers with their blockchain deployments, folks like Union Bank. And as I mentioned, we have this broad partner network of over 40 partners that are also providing blockchain services across all the frameworks, as well as our consulting partners that are helping customers with these implementations. So from our perspective, we believe in offering customers choice, both of technology as well as technology provider, and a range of options for implementing their production workloads. And we'll continue to do that.
Yeah. And talking about kind of having immutable databases, I guess there's stuff out there already, or there has been in the market already. One I came across was a thing called Datomic, for example, is a database that is an audit trail. Did you is there a lot of that kind of thing out there already, or did you think about that? Was that a consideration for you guys?
I mean, I think there's definitely technologies out there, but our decisions were primarily informed by our customers. And what we found was they had a real need for a cryptographically verifiable system with the characteristics that QLDB provided, and that's why we built it. I think if we felt they were better served in other ways, we would have encouraged them to go down those paths instead.
Mm. And I was talking to the Quorum guys not so long ago, and they had an interesting analogy for this idea, this alluring idea that public and private blockchains are going to intermingle in the future. And the analogy was cloud, the way that cloud has evolved. You've got kind of on-prem, hybrid, public cloud. What do you think about that kind of analogy? How do you see that playing out?
I'm not sure of the analogy specifically, but I do think this notion of interoperability will be an important one. And whether it's public to private blockchains, and we've come across interesting examples of customers and partners that'll, for example, write checkpoints of private data onto the public blockchain so somebody else could verify it. But also, if you think of what blockchain networks are trying to do, they're fundamentally trying to connect people that are trying to do business with each other. And those people may be operating their infrastructure in different environments. So I think any blockchain service will have to think about how to enable those use cases for customers at scale.
If we were to think about the quantum ledger as a stepping stone towards this market changing and becoming more public, where do you see in 5 years? I mean, I know it's hard. I mentioned the 20% thing, but how much of this market do you think, or how do you see this market changing over the next 5 years? And
You know, I think it's hard to say at this point. I do think that we're going to see a lot more adoption and at-scale production use cases of all of these technologies that we've mentioned. And I think the ones that solve customer needs the best and the ones with the most richly evolving ecosystems will be the ones that will be the most prevalent. Because I think it's going to be a dynamic space, and I don't think we've seen all the use cases yet that we're going to see in this segment.
And just going back to the use cases with the managed blockchain thing, you mentioned Singapore, you've mentioned supply chain. Can you talk about some more use cases that are cool and interesting?
Yeah, so on the Singapore exchange, that's really about settlement and facilitating payments and speeding up assets and the movements of funds. We've got Guardian Life, for example. They've got a huge network of providers, and they've got payments for life insurance as well as disability claims flowing through the systems. So for them, transparency and speeding up payments and having independently verifiable records of what's happened has been really important. We've got Nestle looking at supply chain transparency and traceability, so the ability to see where everything in a food product came from. We've got distributed retailer supply chains where they've got trading partners all over the world. No single person wants to own all of the infrastructure needed to audit the entire set of transactions that have taken place, so they're using the managed blockchain as a way to distribute all that and have that pushed out. So it's really a broad set of use cases that plug into a variety of business processes across diverse industries.
Do some of you mentioned financial use cases, are any of those guys looking at the quantum ledger thing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think on the financial side, and really with most customers that we speak with, they're interested in taking a look at both because they want to understand where best to apply quantum ledger database or QLDB and where best to use Amazon managed blockchain. And so we have seen both sets of use cases in the same conversation with the same customer.
And you know, things like privacy is a big issue with blockchains. I mean, your engineers have got involved with Hyperledger and the ordering stuff. Do you? Obviously, you work with the Hyperledger guys. Do you look at stuff like channels and some of the other stuff? Do you dive into that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the Amazon managed blockchain perspective, we've got full support for channels. That's in Hyperledger Fabric, so that enables private transactions between partners, even though they're part of the same overall blockchain network. We then, of course, do encrypt everything over the wire, encrypt everything that's at rest or that's ever written to disk or to the ordering services. We've got enterprise-grade key management, so you can handle certificates. We've provided voting APIs, so you can set up rules for how people can join and leave networks. So we've really spent a lot of time thinking through how enterprises really need to operationalize blockchain networks in production.
How many engineers have you got on on this blockchain area?
Yeah, so we don't typically talk about the sizes of our teams, but you know, we like to run lean and iterate quickly with our customers.
Yeah. That's super interesting. And one of my colleagues wrote a story not so long ago about the Lightning Network working with Amazon on e-commerce websites and stuff. And Lee Quinn, actually in the story it says something like, I've got it here, to be clear, Amazon never touches Bitcoin. And I just wondered, is that going to change, or is that, what's your view on cryptocurrencies and stuff?
Yeah, so I think with the work that we've done with QLDB and Amazon Managed Blockchain, we've really focused on the enterprise permission blockchain side of things. We haven't really gone into the cryptocurrency side of things from an AWS perspective, and I can't really speak to the details on the Amazon.com side. I can say that if it's something that matters to customers, we will find a way to have the point of view on it that makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, and the Ethereum community you guys are obviously kind of involved in that, part of that kind of, I mean, I think it's maybe one of the interesting points here about this blockchain as a service stuff, guys like Azure and yourself. It's a huge amount of engineering firepower that can be directed at these open source projects. And I think there's maybe, with some of them, there's a concern. I mean, I think this happened with, I mean, I don't know for sure, but with Quorum, there was the possibility that the bank was having to maintain a very large open source project and was maybe looking to spin it out. But I think maybe this is another added value that a lot of engineering power, a lot of smart guys are looking at enterprise blockchains, augmenting them. I mean, what else are you, I mean, to what extent can you change things and alter stuff, and as much as you like, or whatever?
So when we're working with open source frameworks, our intent is to really stay compatible, participate in the community, help the community and the project move forward so that we have a healthy ecosystem that we're part of, so our customers can benefit from the broad scale innovation that takes place in open source. I think with the ability to invest our own engineering and resources, what we can do is really think about how do we need to help these projects evolve so that they're more easily adoptable by customers at scale. And then I think another important part of it is also, how do we take ownership to ensure that if our customers start using these things, they'll be able to continue using these things regardless of how things play out. And
at the risk of sort of repeating myself, this idea of, we mentioned supply chain and some of the internal work that you've done, and obviously you've got a fantastic insight into this use case. And I just wondered, I mean, this alluring idea that you can add a lot of machine learning, a lot of AI, and a lot of data science to and blockchain's maybe a good way to, a good source of data which is very structured. I just wondered, are you doing that kind of stuff? Managing data lakes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question actually, and part of my other responsibilities are in our data lakes and big data side of the world, and so we've invested quite a bit in making it easy to get data off of your blockchain and into downstream systems for further analysis, for reporting, or for machine learning. So you can understand what sort of activity is taking place, and then how do changes in patterns in your blockchain network activity, what do those really mean for your business and your partners and your trading systems? And so it's a great question and absolutely something that we've thought about and that our customers care about.
Actually, it occurs to me that maybe will be one of the great differentiators in a blockchain as a service offering, because I know that Microsoft as well, that with InsureWave is the one that springs to mind, where the engineers actually did say, we're throwing machine learning at this, we're doing data analytics with this blockchain consortium. Yeah, I mean, dive in more, talk a bit more about that stuff. It's super cool.
Yeah. So at AWS, we offer just a very broad range of services for large-scale data analytics. To give you an example, FINRA, which is the US equities regulator, has over 40 petabytes of data in Amazon S3 that they use to look for bad actors in the market, as well as running data science and machine learning, looking for patterns of fraud. So for big data analytics and machine learning, we've got a suite of services that customers can use. And what we've done is made it easy to move data from QLDB or from Amazon Managed Blockchain into the data lakes and the services that we have, so customers can use those to drive insights about their own businesses. So it's, I think there's absolutely going to be a lot of data recorded in there that could be business valuable.
So I don't want to end on a sensitive question, but with the quantum data ledger, then you'd be able to run AI and analytics on a lot of data that you kind of were centrally. You see where I'm going with this. I mean, companies would be cool about that. How would that work?
Well, actually, just to clarify, at AWS, we have no access to the customer data.
Oh,
so
good.
The Quantum Ledger database, the customer would create an instance of it.
Okay.
But they would be the ones that own it, that own the data in it. They manage the encryption keys.
Sure.
So it would just be companies using our services to gain insights on their own data that's at play here.
It would be to their benefit maybe to say, hey, we want you to help us with that on our supply chain. We want more AI. We're happy with that.
Yeah, and we would definitely work with customers to help them use our tools and services to get more out of their data, but we don't have any view into it.
Awesome. Well, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to sort of say to your boss generally, Jeff Bezos, do the right thing, because after the dot-com boom, when stocks were on the ground, internet stocks, these were the believers. These were the people that believed in what you were doing. So, Jeff, do the right thing. That's my last comment. I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I'll let that one stand, but thank you very much for having me. And folks, we've got a meeting room on the 4th floor, and we're running Amazon Managed Blockchain workshop at 3:30, so if you want to get hands-on with the services, those are options available to you.
For being a great sport, big round of applause for Ralph. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks.